Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the show this week. We have a wonderful guest with us tonight. This is the one and only Otangelo. So we're gonna talk a little bit about intelligent design and evolution and theism and atheism and whatever Otangelo really wants to talk about. We really want to know about it and kind of explore the epistemology. Of course, the goal is of the show is to discover the reasons why people hold the beliefs that they do. So we're really interested to hear more about Otangelo this week. So how's it going, sir?
Yes, I'm doing fine. Thanks, Scott. How about you guys?
I'm doing pretty good. I can't complain. I just got off my day job, so I'm just been looking forward to today's discussion. This is what I live for, these kind of discussions. So I'm just happy to be here with you, man, and looking so much forward to this conversation and hearing more about intelligent design and evolution, and really anything you'd like to talk about. We're open for it. We're just going to have a nice hour-long conversation. And just for our audience, for the sake of the folks that may not know who you are, give us a little background on who you are and how you came to believe what it is that you do.
Yes, I am Swiss Italian. I live in Brazil for 25 years. I converted when I was 18 years old. This was the rather journey through pain where I suffered from depression and I looked for a way out. And then I started to seek God, and that was basically my solution. It wasn't just an instant solving problem, but it was a process. And then I met someone at work, which invited me to go to an evangelical church. Since my background was Catholic, I was raised as a Catholic, so they explained to me the real meaning of the gospel, that we are saved by faith, by believing in Christ as our Lord and Savior, that salvation is a gift. It is not something that we can earn, that we can do something to get it, but it is basically to surrender to Christ, to what He did on the cross for us, that He died for our sins, and that if we accept that, then we receive forgiveness. If we repent from our godless lifestyle, then He will save us and give us eternal life. So I accepted that for me. That is 36 years now. And my focus has always been to have conversations with atheists and to be a testimony and an apologist of what I believe. My goal is not to try to convert atheists. I think conversion is something personal that has each one of us has to decide that individually. So that's not something which my goal is to intervene. It's just to tell others about my experience, and so others can decide for themselves. So basically, that's it. And if someone comes to the faith and needs some guidance and has questions and so forth, then we try to give these answers as far as we can. Now, I have two YouTube channels. One is Intelligent Design Academy. The second one is the God Talk, where I have conversations with atheists and all kind of people like you guys on this channel. Then I have a virtual library where I collect and make public the information which I collect, which I think substantiates my worldview. And the name is reasonandscience.catsport.com. So there you can find what I investigate. Yeah, I think
Okay,
that's
nice.
basically it.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So basically, I guess what I'm hearing you say is you have an experience and you have a background and you discovered more about Christianity, and you're just there to share the information with unbelievers like atheists, just so they can have the information and the viewpoint and the worldview in front of them, so that they can kind of decide for themselves if they want to convert over to the beliefs that you hold. Is that kind of in a nutshell what's going on?
Yes, that's basically correct. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with information and people sharing beliefs, and in fact, I think it's healthy, and I think it's normal for
Yeah.
people to have these sort of beliefs in God and beliefs in interpreting the world a certain way. This is what humans do, have always done.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so there's nothing wrong with that, and it's great that you're willing to put it out on the line. It takes a lot of courage to come out and talk about it and try to give that information, because I'm sure there are a lot of kickback, or people that don't believe, that want to react in a negative way towards the message. Some people, hopefully, some atheists are more friendly with you and are just open to maybe just challenge the ideas or anything. But I do know from experience that when it comes to these sort of topics, it can get heated, and it can get, people can try to humiliate each other as people. And as you may know, the goal here is to learn how to have these kind of conversations, um, where it's friendly and we can just exchange information and maybe challenge each other in a intellectual way and in an honest way, and not really worry so much about controlling the conversation or controlling what the person believes, but just hopefully give each other something to think about on both sides, and and like you said, let the conversion process be a personal thing, because I'm like you. I don't think that I have the power to convert anybody to anything. And I
Yeah.
don't think you feel that way either. And I wouldn't even want to. For me, I wouldn't want to convert people. I want people to be themselves and be genuine. And that's what I strive for. So I can appreciate you for that. So,
Yes, I think so. We are on the same line.
yes, yes, absolutely. Um, So as we get into the conversation, what I notice with you, it seems that your own, I guess, personal ministry, so to speak, focuses mainly on the intelligent design aspect. Is there a reason why you mainly like to talk about that rather than maybe say, a lot of Christians that we have on here, we talk to, they would rather talk about the Bible, or they'd rather talk about
Malay,
the
Larissa.
message of Jesus.
Malay, Frida.
Um, I see you've got
Yeah,
children there.
malay, Frida. Não posso ir agora. Eu não posso ir agora. Tô na live, Larissa. Larissa, você vai respeitar o teu pai. Fecha a porta.
Is that your kids?
Yeah.
I've got two kids myself. They're a handful at that age, huh? That's awesome. Yeah. So I was just gonna say, a lot of folks that come on the show, or people that I talk to in general, they'd rather talk about Jesus or talk about the Bible. And it seems that you mainly focus on the intelligent design aspect. I'm pretty sure, I think I've seen you don't have a problem necessarily talking about Jesus and the Bible. I've seen you talk about that before, but it just seems that more often or not, you're talking about the intelligent design. Is there any reason for that you can express?
Mostly when I talk to atheists, they come from a Christian background. So they know actually the Bible. Some do it even better than I do. And if I start to talk about the gospel and salvation, then these are things which they already know,
Mm,
and they drifted away from that. So it, I mean, if I try to defend the Bible, then an atheist he can bring me 1,000 different topics and reasons why he rejects this and that, and comes up with the classical talking points: slavery, genocide in the Old Testament. And Noah's flood, and God is this and that. And if you deal with one topic, then they go to the next, and in the end, nothing is actually clarified or solved. Um, uh, I think the first question which I like to clarify with an atheist is a more basic one. It's not about the specific God which I believe in, which is the God of the Bible, but rather the basic question: is there rather a God or not? And with God, I mean an intelligent, powerful creator which is eternal, uncreated, necessary, and which created everything which then depends on him. So this is basically the basic characterization, and there you have a true dichotomy. Either that God or gods in plural, exists or not. And
Hmm.
most atheists, of course, they reject that. And so that's the starting point. And I think there comes intelligent design in, because God is characterized as the creator of the physical world, the creator of life. The question, of course, then is God or is an intelligence necessary to explain our physical world and its origins or not? That is the
Hmm.
first question. And once this has been clarified, and eventually an atheist, by letting all these things going through his mind, comes to the conclusion that eventually theism is a more rational position to hold rather than atheism, and then he wants to know who that God actually or that creator actually is, then I am more than happy to lead it through why I believe that the God of the Bible is the true one.
Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, a lot of Christian apologists that I speak to, sometimes they can go in the opposite direction from you for the same reason, but they'll say that, well, if we were to show that the resurrection of Jesus really happened, then by proxy, we've already proven theism. We've already proven God um, that way.
Yeah, that's a good
And
approach.
yeah,
I think
but
that's a
you
good
take it the
approach.
other way, and I think I understand that because the point that you made was that, well, a lot of atheists, most atheists, at least in, especially in the United States of America, I'm not sure about Brazil, but in America, most atheists do tend to have come out of religion and primarily Christianity. So they're already familiar with the resurrection story. They're kind of familiar with, if they really were searching for the proof, I guess, that Jesus was resurrected, I guess they're already familiar with the history, the historicity, the historiography behind it. So that obviously wasn't sufficient enough. Otherwise, or maybe they didn't understand what they read. I guess, and other people could argue that. But the other thing too is, if I guess what you're saying is that if you can also make a strong case for intelligent design, then that sort of implies a God, and then you can kind of more easily talk about the resurrection and go back to the historiography, get that out of the way, and have a grounding for God, some sort of theism, I guess is what you're saying. So I think I understand what your tactic there is, if I can call it that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
I'd be
but
actually quite
I
interested to know, Antangelo, following on from that, what is your grounding for intelligent design? What
Sure.
reasons would you give for that?
well, the thing is that, as I said before, there are basically two possibilities to explain the origin of the physical universe and all in it. That includes, in special, the origin of life and biodiversity. One is that intelligence was required, and the other option is that it was not required. So I think that we see many phenomena which very clearly point to the inference that intelligence was required, and that is the basis of my standpoint and my view.
Let me ask you this one, so that we can get some definitions established. What is intelligence in nature? What would you say is a hallmark of intelligence?
Well, what you probably try to ask is, where can we detect the sign of past intelligent action to instantiate things which we observe in the natural world, right?
Yeah, sure, but I want to know, what is intelligent. Like, some people would say maybe a rock rolling down a hill is not intelligent, as opposed to, say, a person creating a car, or maybe a chimp using a stick as a tool to get bees out of a beehive or something like that. That may be intelligence in nature. So I'm just wondering how you would define it. That might make a big difference as we go forward in the convo.
Yeah, I mean, we can observe intelligent action, for example, in the making of codes, of ciphers, of translation mechanisms, in the establishing of mathematical rules, and then use these mathematical rules to instantiate things which operate based on these mathematical rules. Um, when we fine tune things for a specific purpose, then this is clearly evidence of intelligent action. And there are many other phenomena which we know, they, as soon as we see them, we know these are things instantiated by intelligence, like when we see a machine, a factory, an energy generating turbine, or an energy plant. When we
Mm.
see all these kind of phenomena, then we know these things are always sourced back to an intelligent source, to an intelligent agency which instantiated them, set them up for a specific purpose.
Yeah. So that's kind of key there. Specific purpose. So kind of like a car's purpose is to, you know, provide transportation. It has
Yes,
one singular purpose, and all of its
yes,
functions kind of gear towards that particular purpose. Is that what you mean?
yes.
Okay. If something has um maybe you can see a purpose in it, but then it maybe out of it emerges different purposes or different functionality. Would that be a sign of intelligence as well?
Yeah, you can make devices with different functions. So that is also an option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if a device or something we see, if it has particular properties in it that are kind of useless, is that a sign of intelligence, or what would you say about that?
I would say then eventually you can assign it to something which instantiated that thing without intelligence involved. Like the structure of a stone, for example, doesn't require um, intelligence to make that structure. But if
Mm-hmm.
you see a car which has four wheels and an engine and doors and so forth, then you conclude there had to be someone which did makes that complex thing for a specific purpose.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in a combination of bottom up and top down sort of intelligence? Like, for example, let's say there's certain kind of flies or moths. Or I think the idea I'm thinking about is I think flies that were back in the Industrial Revolution. They were specific colors. It's been so long since I thought about this, but a fly was a specific color, and then because its environment was around like a lot of pollution and
Mutated,
things
yeah.
like that, it sort of blended into its environment, and so its colors sort of changed. And of course, it's going to pass its genes on, and so the fly sort of changed colors. Was that is Would you consider that kind of like intelligence, like a top down sort of idea of intelligence?
Well, we
Inter
know that living organisms that they adapt to the environment. This is a microevolution. This is something which is non-controversial.
Mhm.
Also, creationists accept that. So, I personally think that the commonly given mechanisms to explain these phenomena, like mutations, natural selection, genetic drift, and gene flow, I think these mechanisms, they are part in the toolbox, but there is also a big significant part which is pre-programmed mechanisms which permit an organism to adapt to different environments. And if the first living organism wouldn't have these mechanisms to be able to adapt to different environments, then it couldn't survive. So I would say that evolution or microevolution, or I better describe it as adaptation, is a pre-programmed process which had to be there right when life began, and is, in my understanding, evidence of design.
Okay, so it was kind of like a pre-plan. Your belief is that it was sort of a pre-planning, that God planned everything to emerge a certain way, or maybe He created things directly to be a certain way, and then nature sort of has another factor where it can allow for things like adaptation and things like that to also play a part in what we see in the biodiversity of life. Is that what you mean?
Right, right. I don't deny evolution. It is a proven fact. It happens. Gene mutations happen all the time. And we know that life has actually even very sophisticated mechanisms to diminish these errors. And there are very sophisticated repair mechanisms on several levels, starting with DNA, going to the ribosome, and on other levels. And the cell membrane has repair mechanisms. And if these mechanisms also wouldn't be there right from the beginning, then life couldn't have even started. Then the mutation rate would be far too high in order for a faithful DNA replication to be possible and to occur. And life would have come to a stop right at the beginning, and we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, it's fascinating the way that the universe has allowed not only that life be possible, but also that we're able to turn around and look at it and observe it and talk about it. Like we can actually, it's actually something that we can conceive of, like it's conceptual. It's, it's something we can have this conversation about. That's amazing.
Yes.
So if something, let me ask you, let me just get a kind of a confidence level where you're at. For this intelligent designer, in the way that you're describing it, how confident are you that this is truly the case? Like, say, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, of course, that this is absolutely case, 0 being that you're just closed-minded. It's not the case that intelligent design is a thing. Where would you
Well,
rate?
I think that I mean, you know very well that theists are very commonly accused to use the God of the gaps, basically
Mhm.
saying, "Oh, there has been something not discovered," and theists just say, "Oh, because we don't know, we just put God into that gap," and I completely disagree with that. And I think
Mhm.
there are two lines of reasoning which converge to theism and intelligent design as the best inference and explanation of origins. One is that um, naturalism, or the only nature proposition, is completely bankrupt. And I can show you many conversations with atheists where I ask them, how can we explain our existence without the creator? When you take intelligence out of the equation and then try to explain the main talking points in regards of origins, that is the origin of the universe, the origin of the laws of physics, the constants of physics, fine-tuning of the universe, fine-tuning of the earth, origin of life, evolution, biodiversity, consciousness, why there is morality. In regards of any of these talking points, atheists, they don't have ever, in my understanding, provided any consistent answer that explains all these phenomena based on natural, unguided, non-intelligent means. So I can use eliminative inductions and say that because there is no compelling natural explanation for all these things, then by default, since there is a God or not, then the God option is the better explanation. But I don't stay just on that. I also say that theism is substantiated positively on its own ground through positive evidence. Because there was a beginning of the universe, there was a cause. Because the universe is finely tuned, it required a fine tuner. Because the universe operates based on mathematical laws and rules, there has to be a mathematician which did set them up. Because there are fundamental laws which are unchanged and they are arbitrary, and we don't have an explanation why they are set up precisely the way they are, like the speed of light. We don't know why it is 300,000 kilometers per second. There is no physical explanation. It could be eventually different. There are other things which, like the charge of positive and negative of the electric charge, it could be just positive, and if it would be so, then we wouldn't be here having this conversation. We couldn't have stable atoms. Then the gravity is just attractive. Why? It could be attractive and also repulsive. And if it would be so, then there would be chaos in the universe. We couldn't have stars and planets. There is no deeper reason why it is so. It is simply set up in this way, and it permits life. That demands an explanation. And I don't see any other rational explanation rather than someone highly super intelligent, which had the intention to create a life permitting universe, did all these things set up in the right way in order to permit the universe to host life. Then we come to life. We see instructional assembly information which is stored in the genome. And I, as a machine designer, I know that if I need to make a machine for a specific purpose, then my boss comes to me and says, I need that machine for this and that. It has to be this. I have to think about how to solve that problem. I have to sit to the drawing table, and then I need to use my intelligence to set up a blueprint, a plan, which then can be read by the mechanical workers, and they can instantiate then that machine. That is a process which we only know of intelligence being capable of instantiating. And that's precisely analogously what we see in biology, where the information stored in the genome is like a blueprint or is instructional assembly information, which is then used to make molecular machines, which are proteins, and at the end, cell factories, which are chemical factories in a literal sense, because they make the basic building blocks of life, which are complex molecules, and they don't simply exist in nature. And they are also made based on the instruction in genes and in epigenetic information. And that is positive evidence that intelligence was required to set up life, to set up these information-bearing systems. And of course, also machines. We know only that complex machines made of several parts which have to interact together, they have to be instantiated. That it is something which has to come from an engineer which thinks about how to set it up, and then they are made based on precisely preconceived information. And we don't know of natural unguided means which are stochastic random processes that they would be capable to instantiate these machines. So this is another example of positive evidence why I think that in order to create life, intelligence was required. I could go on and on, but I don't
Oh
want to
yeah,
have
I'm sure you
Well,
could.
I'd like
It
to-
sounds like a very powerful argument that you're making. Just to kind of maybe for our listeners to provide a little kickback to that, little pushback. Something you said is that we don't really have a really compelling explanation in naturalism. That was something you said. If we don't have an explanation for something, does that mean therefore the explanation is X, that it's intelligent design? Necessarily, I'm just playing the devil's advocate here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that if natural mechanisms are an inadequate explanation, then whatever alternative explanation that is at hand, even if we don't fully comprehend it, is the better explanation. And I agree, we don't have answers to all questions in regards of, for example, how God set up the physical world. We don't know that. but that doesn't mean that it is logically impossible. And as soon as it is logically possible, there is no reason why we should discard that option as a reasonable hypothesis.
Yes,
Now, we
I would
can't
agree
actually
that
explain, obviously, and I will agree that we can't explain how the universe came to be here as we see it today. We can't. We can explain after a certain point from the observable universe. We can explain from the oldest point that we can see back. We can explain how we got here, how the universe evolved from that point, but we can't obviously explain before that because we can't observe before that. So there's an unknown there. Now, as atheists, we would openly accept that there is unknowns, things that we can't know as of yet. There's a data set which is missing, which is why we can't answer 100% or this is how it happened, because we have that missing data set. I would like to ask you, how do you account for that missing data set?
Well, first of all, science isn't about proving things, and science always moves forward and changes its propositions depending on new information and evidence that comes up. But in regards of the origin of the universe, there is a pretty wide consensus that the universe had a beginning, even if we don't know the first 10 to the first Planck time, the first 10 to the 43rd second prior, what exactly happened. What we do know is that there was a state of immense energy of an extremely hot, of trillions and trillions of Celsius degrees hot singularity, and that energy was concentrated in one form, and it was extremely ordered. And that is actually counterintuitive, because things which are not based on intelligence, they are usually very disordered. And science physics doesn't have an explanation why the universe started in that extremely ordered state. That is counterintuitive.
Well, we
is
do
our
have
intuition a
multiple.
good guide when it comes to
Yeah,
science?
I would say in some cases, yes. So we can use intuition when we see things which are unknown and try to explain them, then we can use intuition. I would say yes. Of course, not only, but I mean, in regards of worldviews, we don't have proofs. Neither atheists can prove that the natural world is all there is, neither we as theists can prove that God exists. So what we are doing is we are taking the knowledge that we have, the science that we have, the evidence that we have, and then try to make the right interpretation and
I
see
see.
where it leads.
So
So
science really isn't saying anything about God one way or the other, but but what you're saying is that if we step out of science for a second and we just go on our intuition, then it all kind of makes sense that God would be the answer.
no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I rely heavily on science, on
No,
philosophy
I
and
know we all have
theology.
the same data, right?
Yeah,
Like atheists or an unbeliever has the same data that the theists do. We're all looking at the same
exactly.
scientific data. We all read the same book, but you're saying that an atheist is maybe not compelled by the evidence to say God did it, but a theist, of course, would be compelled to say God did it. And you're saying what
Yeah,
makes
and
the difference is our intuition. You're saying that you're just going to go ahead and say, look, it's intuitive. Why not just go ahead and believe based on our intuition? Whereas maybe an atheist would argue, well, intuition can be misleading, so I would rather say I don't know. And you're saying that it's more rational to say that we do know it's God.
I wouldn't say that intuition is the only um, tool that we have. I actually disagree with what you just said. And just to clarify what I mean, I think intuition can be a part of our process to come to a conclusion, but not only, of course. I think that science is very important, data is very important. And when we have the more data that we have at hand, the more information that we have in regards of how the universe is set up, and biology and biochemistry and so forth, the more we can actually rationalize what is the best explanation. And it is not difficult because we have just two competing hypotheses. One is intelligence and the other is not. And when you see signs of intelligence that had to be acted in the past to set up certain things, then you can actually, with a very solid um, conclusion, say, well, if non-intelligent mechanisms are too unspecific to bring forward feature X, then intelligence is with high certainty the better explanation.
Okay. Would you say that all things that exist are created and designed by God, that everything, or did he just create some things in the universe? Or is all things a creation by God?
Oh, I think that the entire universe is a creation by God. That starts with the Big Bang, which had to be finely adjusted in order to have the right expansion rate. If that would not be the case, then the universe would have expanded too fast, and then there would be a lifeless universe, void of stars and planets and matter
Okay.
and atoms. It would be just void, or it would have recollapsed to the singularity, and then you wouldn't have any universe whatsoever.
So if everything, for those reasons, if everything was created, how do you tell the difference between a created thing from an uncreated thing in order to know that everything was created?
I just gave you an example. If you see a blueprint of a specific device like a machine or a factory, and then you don't know who made that blueprint or what made that blueprint, then you know intuitively that it was an intelligence which made it, but
Oh,
you
so
know
you're saying
also.
like a factory is created, but like say a rock or a tree was not created. So that's how we tell the difference.
Yes, absolutely, because
Okay,
like for
but
example, if
didn't you
if
just say I guess what's confusing me is you're saying everything was created. So I'm just wondering,
I know the confusion. Of course, a rock is also created by God, but the structure, the pattern which you see in a rock isn't necessarily the product of an intelligence. But if you see a machine, a factory, or a blueprint, then you know by experience that only intelligence can instantiate such devices, such things, while non-intelligent stochastic random events, they are too unspecific. They can come up with any kind of outcome, and in order to come up with that specific outcome, it is in a huge sequence space or in a huge space of possibilities, a very narrow thing which will instantiate precisely what we are talking about.
okay.
Now,
So
when
okay,
you
go
were
ahead, Katie.
mentioning about a factory and a car and that, when we know that these things are created because of the complexity, because of the blueprint that we have for these things, is it because of the complexity that we know that they were created, or is it because we have seen them being created? We know what human creations look like. We're expecting to see a certain thing in a created object. Thus, we're able to identify the created object. So, in other words, if an alien species, which had a completely different type of technological advancement to ourselves, was completely alien, their technology, would they be able to identify a car being, or a factory being, a created object? Or could they mistake it for being a natural object?
Well, let's suppose the inverse. Let's suppose that we would go to a foreign planet, and there we would suddenly encounter a city full of advanced factories, high-tech factories, and we would see their cars and energy plants and things like that. And there would be no aliens around whatsoever. Maybe it would be an abandoned planet and an abandoned city. And you would have to think about it. Well, what happened here? and you would have two options: either there were some alien creatures there which made that city and abandoned it, or it was just a product of random chance of natural forces. What do you think would be the more rational inference on that scenario?
The point I'm trying to make is, how would it, if it was extremely alien, if it was something that we'd never seen before, how would we differentiate between the natural thing and the created thing if we'd never seen it being created before? We
Well,
didn't have
you
a
mentioned,
blueprint for it.
yeah,
You
you
mentioned
mentioned
blueprint.
complexity. What is complexity? Complexity is a device, something which is made of several interacting parts, like gears, for example, in a watch, which work
Mm.
in an integrated fashion together to, in the end, then show you what time it is. Okay, so this is complex. And the question, of course, is how did that come to be? And we know only of the watchmaker, which is capable of making a watch. And I think this is actually an analogy which I hear very frequently: atheists saying, oh, the watchmaker argument, it has been debunked, has been refuted. But and when you ask how, then they come up with evolution or things like that. But that isn't a good explanation, because, for example, in order to set up life, you need many molecular machines. You need information stored in DNA. You need DNA, which is like a hard disk, which stores information, and all these things. You need self-replication and the proteins which interact together to instantiate self-replication. And
Let
all
me
these
ask you a
kind of things.
question. Let me ask you this question then. Let's say the planet Mars, right? Scientists will say that there's no intelligent activity on Mars. There's no evidence of intelligence on Mars. But Mars has the same sort of factories you're talking about, like molecules, like cell, like, there's all sorts of, you know, molecular and basic materials that are kind of like very, complex sort of properties on the planet Mars. Why don't scientists say that there's intelligence, there's signs of intelligent design on Mars, like just like there's factories and cars here on Earth? It's the same thing. It's the same analogy, right? It's all equal, right?
Mhm. Well, the thing is that these molecules, they are stochastic, they are random, and I don't even know what molecules that you're talking about. But I think I gave a good example of how we can make a distinction. If you look at Mount Rushmore, you know what the rock is in a natural state and what is a scarp, which are the faces of the four presidents, and you know intuitively, immediately, there was someone, a sculptor, which made these images, and you know the rock on its side is just a product of natural physical forces. So we know how to make the distinction between things which are designed and which are not designed. And I think that everything that we've seen on Mars so far hasn't been classified as something which most probably is the direct product of intelligence. I mean,
Do
in
you
the
think
sense,
that,
of course, I believe
sure.
that the planet was made by God, of course, but I don't think that you see there kind of things which would be specifically said to be, oh, there had to be intelligence to instantiate precisely this molecule which we are seeing here.
So, as just a little hypothesis here, suppose the Land Rover finds water on Mars, which I think there is water on Mars, but let's say they found water on Mars, and in the water they found molecules and everything like that, like things that I guess they haven't found, but they found these things like flagellum or something comparative to that, like little mini factories. Do you think? I know you would say that that's proof then that God designed stuff on Mars. Do you think scientists would say that there was proof, therefore, of design on Mars? And if not, why not? Why wouldn't they agree?
If you would see a bacteria with a flagellum, then the inference would be that God, for some reasons, permitted planet Mars to have life. But that still would then be, I mean, my explanation then still would be God made it so for whatever
Hmm.
reason.
Do you think scientists would see it that way?
Oh, I mean, you have scientists which are believers and
Hmm.
scientists which are atheists which do not believe in God. So I think being a scientist doesn't equal to be an atheist. Being a
Right.
scientist means that you make investigations of the natural world, you have a certain education in some field, and you work in that field. But I mean, that doesn't tell you anything in regards of what religion that someone holds.
Perfect. Perfect. And that's why I say scientists, to kind of make it a little neutral for us here. So that if a scientist were to say, if and I would say, like, scientists, that's kind of general. Let's say the consensus of science. Do they and let's not even worry about Mars, because that's just a hypothetical, but let's say when it comes to things like flagellum and things here on Earth, do the consensus of scientists think these things are intelligently designed, or is this sort of like a fringe science, or how would you describe that?
You know, the consensus in science is that everything can be explained by natural means. And
Hmm.
that has its source in the 19th century, um, after Darwin published his book of evolution. Then Thomas Huxley was someone which strongly promoted that view, and he was the president of the X Club. And they basically, in a period of about 20 years, they were able to um, uh, um, put as a basis that science shouldn't invoke the supernatural. Everything should be explained by natural means. And this holds up until today. So if you
Hmm.
find, for example, at the end of the conclusion of a science paper, the explanation of why X is it is, it will always be a natural explanation, usually resorting to evolution or things like that. You will never find a secular science paper pointing to God, saying because we are seeing a blueprint in DNA, therefore, most likely intelligence was involved to create that blueprint, that chromosome or DNA. You won't find that. And the reason is because arbitrarily it has been established that science should never point to a supernatural cause. Now, I think when it comes to operational science, this is justified. If you make an investigation about how something works, then you should expect just to find natural mechanisms which are in operation in biology, in biochemistry, and so forth. But when we are talking about origins and about historical sciences and about things, how they came actually to exist, then a priori excluding an intelligent designer as a possible explanation, I think it is unwarranted, and it has resulted in a lot of bad inferences in science papers where they have pressed natural mechanisms into the explanation, which nonetheless is unwarranted and I would say very, very case inadequate.
Okay. Here's
I
an
would disagree.
epistemic question.
So,
Um,
sorry, Scott. Yeah,
oh, sure.
I,
Go right ahead. I'm sorry.
I would disagree that that's the main reason why the majority of scientists always push for a natural explanation of things. I would argue that actually for a great consensus of scientists that the reason is because never before has there ever been a question that has been answered by God and that has needed an answer and has actually factually been answered using God. There's been absolutely no question that's been answered by God and been proven true. So I would argue that that's the reason why we push for natural means, because there's no reason to put God in there because it's never happened before.
It's an appeal to track records. So, in other words, um, if we see like 1,000 white houses on the right hand side of the road as we drive for 1,000 miles, at 1,001 mile, we wouldn't expect like a huge purple house on the left hand side of the road. We would infer the White House. So the basic inference is that because this new category of things we call supernatural hasn't really been shown, um, there's no example of that in history. So I think that may be why science is appealing to that track record. For example, I was going to ask an epistemic question, which is like, would you consider yourself and myself as natural beings or supernatural beings?
Well, I personally, I don't like that distinction between natural and supernatural.
Me
I
neither.
think that I think it is a meaningless concept in face of the fact that there are many phenomena here which we experience, but which cannot be physically measured or detected. Like, for example, if I ask you, um, what is the size of your thought in your brain? You cannot tell me, oh, it has size X or things like that. Or
Hmm.
if I ask you, where exactly is your thought in your brain located? You cannot open your skull and show me exactly your thought where it is generated and processed in the brain. So, is your thought therefore a natural or a supernatural phenomena?
Right.
So,
That's what I was getting at,
so
is that it seems like if we consider ourselves as natural beings, we're intelligent, right? And so we're an example of of intelligence in nature. And so the idea of God being this supernatural creator, because he creates and because he's got a mind and all these other things we imagine, may not be pointing at anything supernatural. Nature, I mean, intelligence could just be a product of nature, right? Like, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with like some basic slime mold. Slime mold doesn't have a brain, doesn't have neurons, yet the thing plans for the future. It does irrational things. It creates mazes, creates solutions, does all sorts of behaviors that we would correlate with creatures with brains, like humans, for example. Yet these things don't have brains. These things act intelligently. Um, and so that's an idea of intelligence in nature. Now these slime molds are kind of emergent properties in the sense that they sort of congeal together to create this intelligent entity, almost like an ant colony or something like that. And so we have this idea called metaphysical emergence, which sort of explains how something weird like intelligence and consciousness could possibly emerge from more basic fundamental properties in reality. Um, have you ever heard of anything like that?
well, the thing is that science calls the quest of the origin of the mind the hard problem of
Hmm.
consciousness. Why? Because there is no scientific explanation. And
Hmm.
of course, there is a philosophical debate which is very old in regards of
Mind
if
body.
idealism
Hmm.
is true, if materialism is true, if dualism is true. All these topics, I guess you guys are familiar of those topics. I
Yeah.
go with the view as a Christian that dualism is true, that the mind is first, and it is a separate entity from the physical, from matter, from atoms, from energy. It is in substance different than matter.
Mental. Hmm.
There is a
So,
there is
so
an
I don't
issue
believe
with
that
that
the
though.
mind can be the product of the brain. And there is another problem that if you say one single neuron cannot be conscious, but 100 billion neurons can be conscious, that is a fallacy of composition.
Hmm.
Well, I would
Um,
disagree with that because the problem with what you've just stated is that neuroscientists in the past 10 years have actually been able to locate where thoughts actually come from. We've been able to actually map how thoughts emerge from the brain. And on top of that as well, we're actually able to control thoughts and consciousness by messing with the brain, by sending electrical signals through the brain. And we
Yeah.
also know from people who've been in car accidents and things like that, that when certain parts of the brain get damaged, it affects the consciousness in a certain way. And we can even predict, using the data that we've gathered, we can even predict how that damage is going to affect the consciousness of the person. So
Right.
all the evidence seems to point to, you were talking earlier about intuition and what things seem to point to, the best explanation for something. It seems right now that the best explanation is that the consciousness is an emergent property of the brain.
Yeah, I was about to say, you had Otangelo, you brought up the composition and division fallacy, and the way I understand it, though, is kind of the opposite. Like, it's to say that since we're conscious, that consciousness can't emerge from unconscious things, therefore conscious must come first. That seems to be a composition division fallacy, because it's kind of like a say like a square brick house. You know, there's no brickness to a house, right? Like a brick isn't a house. Just because a house is made up of bricks, it doesn't mean that the house is a brick or the bricks are a house or anything like that. It's the accumulation of the bricks that make up this thing we call a house, right? So it seems to be that now I'm not saying that that's necessarily means that there isn't, idealism or something like that isn't the case. We don't know that. I mean, it's just that to conclude one way or the other would be a fallacy, is what I would say. But yeah, the evidence seems to indicate that it seems like consciousness, at least in the human consciousness, in the way that we understand it, or in the richness of our consciousness, it comes about from an accumulation, kind of like the bricks that make up a house. Now, it could be the panpsychists are right, that each component neuron has its own little bit of consciousness, and that there's some sort of proto-consciousness. None of that is proven, so I don't believe in it either way myself. But those are the arguments to maybe explain consciousness. There's another side to the story, that maybe it's not this richness of consciousness that gives rise to human consciousness and animal consciousness and everything like that. But there's another side that says that very fundamental, simple properties can congeal and create this rich sort of form of consciousness, or what we call consciousness. And I would also agree with you that science, it is a hard problem for science, because science really, it's looking at the objective by nature. Science is objective by nature. Consciousness is subjective by nature. So there's already a conceptual gap right there. Consciousness is looking at behavior, or I'm sorry, science is looking at the behaviors, whereas consciousness is looking at the internal experience of things. So yeah, it's a big mystery. It's fascinating. I love the topic myself. I'm just a bit agnostic on it. I'm not a hard materialist. I'm kind of different than Katie in that way. I'm not really sold on materialism, because I think the question is still open. So I kind of reserve belief. I'm sort of agnostic on it. But you go right ahead, explain your side of that question.
Yes, I just said. I mean, the thing which Borg brought up, that the people which have a brain damage, then they eventually become different. They have different capabilities of consciousness or thoughts or so. And I see it like the pianist and the piano. If you destroy the piano, then the pianist cannot play the piano as previously. So that is my explanation. Yeah.
Okay. So you don't see a physical basis for it. I kind of understand. There is a difference between the abstract and the concrete. There is a conceptual gap between concepts and concrete things, like thoughts and imagination. These aren't things. So I
In my
understand where
understanding,
you're
they are
going.
fundamentally different. And of
Yep.
course, if you posit that the brain and neurons have the capability to produce consciousness, then what about the human heart, which is called the small brain, because there are
Hmm.
lots of neurons in the
Yeah,
heart,
even the
not only
stomach
the
has
brain.
more neurons than the brain does. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I
and then you
understand.
have to ask.
And like I said, the slime mold, it has none, and yet
So,
it's doing all these intelligent maneuvers in reality. So, one last question. I know we're kind of running out of time. I want to respect your time. One last little question: do you have any markers set up for yourself that would lower your confidence in intelligent design?
well, if someone could show me an example of how stochastic unguided events can make a blueprint, and based on that blueprints, then construct machines and production lines and turbines and computers and energy plants, and in the end, complex factories, then of course that would diminish my confidence that intelligence is the best explanation, and then I would say, yeah, eventually, then in that case, if that can be demonstrated, then eventually unguided non-intelligent mechanisms could also instantiate these things. But we know just by statistics that this is in the realm of the impossible.
Mm. Anything you want to add, Katie, to that?
Um, if I add anything to that right now, we're going to go massively over time.
Yeah, I kind of get that idea. We could definitely go really in on it, but yeah,
I think we could delve into that in another show if you wanted to come back on, Otangelo, because I
yeah.
do have some points I would like to make on after tonight. But yeah, I think it would be probably best for another show.
Yeah, it's up to you.
Okay. Hey, I really enjoyed the conversation, Otangelo. You know, the one thing I love about you, man, is the difference between you and all these other guys out there, like a Darth Dawkins or these other apologists, is you're so cool. You're so laid back and you're so easy to talk to and you're not confrontational. You're just so polite. And I love that, man. I just love it. I think that's your winning. That's what's going to win you people to your ideas is the fact that you're so cool, man. And I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your ideas. I think they're fascinating. I think that you make a strong argument for intelligence. I think you're one of the strong arguers for that point of view. I mean, we obviously may not agree on our personal, but this isn't about a debate show. This isn't about us. This is about you. And I just appreciate you coming on and hopefully I've asked some questions out there that the audience wanted to be asked. So I appreciate you giving a voice to that, you know.
If some of your audience has some questions which have not been raised, I'm open to come again, and we can tackle these questions and address them. No problems. And yes, I think, I mean, I don't see the need to be confrontational. I think an exchange in a friendly manner, even if we disagree with what we believe or what inferences that we draw based on the evidence. I mean, I respect it. I have absolutely no problem. And I don't see atheists as my enemies. And I have many times said, I want to build breaches and not walls. I don't see atheists as my enemies.
Yeah, that's good, man. Cool. Well, let's keep the conversation going, man. Let's keep it friendly, keep it open. Let's talk about how we come to believe stuff and I look forward to the next conversation. Maybe in a few weeks we'll hit you back
Sure,
up and do another continuation and I would
sure,
definitely enjoy it if you would do that with us. But
cool. Okay.
anyways, guys, I really appreciate it. I've actually got to run myself. Some stuff came up here at the last minute, but I really appreciate the show. I enjoyed it. I've been looking all day for this, looking forward to it all day, and glad I finally got to really have a nice in-depth conversation with you, Otangelo, and meet you, you know, a little better. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate you, and
Yes.
you guys have a great, wonderful weekend.
Yes. Thank you again for having me at your show. Have a nice weekend, everybody.
Yep, you too.